Scared is better brings you just a little bit more. Lydia's day started out rough. She'd set 8 alarms on her iPhone, and not one of them went off. When she checked the screen, her stomach dropped. PM, not AM. She launched out of bed, smashed her big toe on the dresser, and yowled into her tiny room. In the bathroom, she discovered she was out of toothpaste. No time to straighten her hair, she swept it into a ponytail. Snap, the last hair tie. She barely caught the bus. From her seat, she watched the other senior girls pull into the lot in their own cars, the bus filled with junior high kids. As she climbed the steps, her backpack strap finally gave up after 4 years and snapped. By lunch, Lydia was done. She nearly flunked American history and stood at Mr. Dennis's desk after class, smiling like she just hadn't bombed the quiz. He studied the red 65%, adjusted his glasses, and said nothing. Lydia waited. Mr. Dennis hated being rushed. He sighed finally and nodded. Over his shoulder, she watched her bus pull out of the parking lot. So she had to start the long walk home, the sun pressing down on her shoulders as she carried the contents of her now useless backpack in her arms. She was almost home when thirst hit her hard enough to make her mouth ache. She dug through her pockets and came up with just enough money for a soda. Inside, she balanced books against her chest, a styrofoam cup, her money pinched between her fingers. Every step forward made her feel like the notebook slipped lower into the crook of her arm. Ahead of her was a tiny elderly woman in a loud muumuu, a bright scarf wrapped tightly around her head. The woman counted coins for tea, then lottery tickets, then paused, digging back at her purse. Lydia shifted her weight. Her arms burned. The notebook slid again. The woman pawed through her purse, muttering softly to herself. Lydia clenched her jaw. She could only think of her dry mouth, her shaking arms, how slowly the quarters were appearing. It felt endless. And that's when she saw the woman's hands. Not hands, nubs of fingers. No knuckles, less than an inch long. The woman used the heel of her palm to push the final coins over the counter. The scarf around her ears shadowed her eyes, cinched tight like it was holding something in. The soda was finally paid for. Outside the quick right, Lydia sat on the curb, rearranging her books, letting the ache fade from her arms. The old woman shuffled past her. Something metallic slipped from the woman's pocket and hit the pavement with a soft, bright sound. Lydia looked down. She thought about calling out to the woman, about saying anything at all as the dropped object caught the light and seemed to wink at her. But the woman kept hobbling away. Nothing good happened today. Guilt tugged at her as she stood up, glanced around, and snatched the metal off the pavement. It was heavier than a coin. The weight of it set solidly in her palm, and that unexpected heft sent a small thrill through her. Too nervous to examine it there, she slipped it into her pocket and started home. Halfway down the block, she realized her books felt lighter, easier to carry. At home, she finally looked at it. It was a medal, a small, horned figure with goat legs. Pan, she thought. The god Pan, staring straight ahead. The relief was deep and old, the edges worn, smooth from years of handling. She loved the way it sat in the middle of her palm, emitting a soft heat. Imagined or not, the warmth of it made her keep holding it and softly stroking it. Guilt stirred again, but then quieted. Maybe she was due for a little luck. That night, she studied for her retake quiz. Her eyelids drooped as she read about the Louisiana Purchase. Without thinking, she reached down for the medal and rubbed her thumb across the carving until sleep took her. She woke up the next morning to her first alarm, and on the floor next to her bed lay the black hair tie, her favorite one, the one she lost months ago. She brushed her hair slowly, enjoying how shiny it was today. She grabbed her old junior high backpack, the one with the padded straps. At the bottom, her fingers brushed paper. $10. She didn't just ace the history quiz, she finished early. Her pen seemed to move on its own, ticking off answers without hesitation. When Mr. Dennis started grading it, his eyebrows lifted. Lydia smiled. The medal was warm in her pocket, and her fingers wrapped around it soothingly. She kept her fingers curled around it as she walked towards the bus, still floating from her quiz score. Halfway across the lot, someone called her name. "Hey, Lydia!" She turned around and nearly tripped. Raina, very popular Raina, was waving at her from the driver's seat of a royal blue Jeep, leaning over the passenger seat like this happened all the time. "I was just thinking about you," Raina said. "We had homeroom together freshman year, right?" She smiled. You want to ride home? Lydia didn't hesitate. As they pulled out of the parking lot, Raina told her her aunt owned a Jeep dealership on Main. They needed someone a few nights a week at the front desk, which meant it was within walking distance and easy hours for Lydia. I don't know, Raina said. I thought, you were just the first person I thought of. Lydia laughed, but her hand tightened in her pocket. Within a week, she was working at the dealership, wearing her nicest clothes, sitting behind a polished glass desk. Her grades seemed settled solidly into A's. Doors opened. Things clicked. It felt like something had shifted, like she'd finally found the right angle in the world, and the metal stayed warm. The next week, she pulled off her socks and froze in fear. Her big toenails were gone, smooth pink skin where they should have been. She gagged, heart pounding. Maybe it was from when she stubbed her toe. Maybe this was something medical. She would ask herself for years if she knew then. But of course she knew. This wasn't luck. It was transactional. A quiet exchange. And as she stared down at her bare toes, she understood something else. Luck was no lady. What mattered now wasn't why, it was how much. That afternoon, Mr. Dennis pulled her aside, and he told her essay was so good that he was submitting it for the State Citizenship Award. Lydia barely remembered writing it. At the dealership, she'd taken to answering phones. She made easy small talk with vendors and customers alike. Without thinking, she rolled the metal across her palm as she talked. On one call, she found herself explaining why Jeeps were the best vehicles on the market. The man on the other end agreed. Their conversation grew animated, almost excited. He asked to speak to the manager. 30 minutes later, the manager burst out of his office, wide-eyed. That was the owner of Midworld Pest Control, the biggest pest control company in the city. They're switching their entire fleet to Jeeps. He grabbed Lydia by the shoulders, laughing in near tears. You did this! He then disappeared into his office and came back with a set of keys. You're not walking home today, he said. Take the loaner vehicle. The metal was warm in her pocket. As she drove home in the red Jeep, she felt so good behind the wheel she didn't want to get out. By the next morning, all of her toenails were gone. No blood, no pain, just smooth pink skin. She knew it was the metal, not logically, instinctively. Her stomach twisted as she stared down, fear blooming at the thought of what might come next. And in the same moment, she noticed the key in her hand. Senior year passed. She stood at graduation wearing a gold stole that read valedictorian, feeling strangely detached. The metal rested in her pocket, and she wore closed-toed boots. The dealership gave her a car. When she applied for the UCLA scholarship, it felt like a formality. It was. She collected 6 scholarships in total: tuition, books, housing. She graduated summa cum laude with 4.2 GPA and barely noticed. By the time she stepped out of her white Cadillac to start her job at Panic Microbiology, she needed a cane. Her work, a revolutionary AI system, spread quickly. Hospitals adopted it, providers competed for it. When she was tired of working, she turned towards the stock market. She was wiser now, 28 years old. When the accountant asked how much she wanted to invest, she rolled her eyes and said all of it. Within months, she was a millionaire. One of her side investments became a household name, and by 35, she was approaching billionaire status. The metal stayed warm. 2 boys are walking past the mansion at the end of the street. 22 rooms, 20-car garage, a driveway as long as a football field. The front lawn looked like a public park rather than someone's home. White stone pillars framed the porch, and the doors tall and ornate, their gilded edges catching the light. The air smelled sweet from the rose garden that stretched wider than a tennis court, but the place was eerily quiet. One boy slows down and cranes his neck. My uncle said there are 5 Corvettes in there. I saw a pearl white Rolls Royce pull out once, the other boy said. I dare you to touch the gate. No way, the boy said. My sister says it's cursed. The first one scoffed. Your sister's never seen it. Of course she has, the boy said. He lowered his voice. She saw it being taken out in a special car, with no in a special chair with no arms, and it has no ears and just one eye and bald and one really short leg. He glanced up at the high window where they could see the figure somewhat sitting, leaning in the second floor. They say it just sits there watching. The boys stood quietly for a moment. Gosh, the first boy said. Sure is a nice house, though.